Does someone want to do the reading of the passage? Or do you want me just to read through?
All right, Father Branco, you put your hand up. Oh, no, he switched us off. No,
I'm here. I just muted because I've got a... Yeah, sorry. I'm not going to speak.
There's an echo.
Okay. All right.
That's why I'm not going to speak.
Okay.
Okay. I can do it. So Jesus raises the son of the widow of Nain. So this follows on from obviously a different verse, and as they're actually entering into another city. So now it happens the day after that he went into a city called Nain, and many of his disciples went with him, and a large crowd. And when he came near the gate of the city, behold, a dead man was being carried out, the only son of his mother, and she was a widow. And a large crowd from the city was with her. When the Lord saw her, he had compassion on her, and said to her, "Do not weep." Then he came and touched the open coffin, and those who carried him stood still. And he said, "Young man, I say to you, arise." And so he who was dead sat up and began to speak, and he presented him to his mother. The word fear, I think, is they use a different word in different versions. So in the New King James Version, they say, "Then fear came upon all." I think in the other versions, it was like, "Then awe came upon all," like everyone was in awe of what happened. So I'm not quite sure of the translation into fear. Maybe Father Branco can explain the variations on that. Then fear came upon all, and they glorified God, saying, "A great prophet has risen up among us, and God has visited his people." So I don't know, before I go into it, Father Branco, do you know of the reasons of this variation with the fear came upon all? My study Bible. I think our study Bible.
Speaking. Can you hear me when I start speaking?
Yeah.
It's okay now.
Okay.
Good.
All right. Yeah, I wasn't actually going through this, but what verse is that? And fear came on, or
This is the New King James Version.
yes, and it's only there.
That's the one that I used because I don't know. That's the one that I was told to look at. But hold on, Luke 11.
I can't
I'm pretty
see.
sure it doesn't. I'm pretty sure that's not the word.
I mean, the word fear and awe are not dissimilar.
No,
They're
no,
not
no,
dissimilar, but there is a variation. So I wasn't quite
one word in one language doesn't necessarily correspond to a single word in a different language. And the New King James was translated hundreds of years ago as well. So words can change meaning and have different nuances.
Yeah, that's one thing. I mean, we can talk about that particular word like fear. What does it mean, fear? Because you'll maybe see here many Christian preachers and priests, and definitely quoted by fathers of the church many times, that the beginning of the wisdom is the fear of God. Quote from the Ecclesiastes. And so, what is the meaning of fear? Should we be afraid of God? Is God this fearful judge and we should be scared of him? Is fear the same thing as being scared? It's not, because if it would be the same, if it would mean the same, then you wouldn't have two different words for that. So there is definitely a difference in meaning. The biblical meaning of the word fear is more like love connected with fear. And
like a respect.
Excuse me?
Like a respect?
More intimate. One of my teachers who've passed away like a year and a half ago, and he was a bishop, and he explained this in this beautiful way. He said the fear of God is the same fear that you have when you approach to a cradle with a baby inside, and you're taking the baby with fear, not because you're scared, but because, not scared that you're afraid of the baby, but because you're scared you don't hurt the baby. So this is this fear with love. And that's why before you approach to receive the Holy Communion, the priest actually says, sa strahom Božjim I vjerom pristupite, which means with the fear of God and faith, draw near. Well, that means you're invited to approach with this fear, which implies love. Does that make sense? You know, fear, and you have, if you can picture and have this image of a baby, and you're approaching to take the baby, and you're afraid, not because you're scared, but it's just love and care and
Is it like you don't want to let that let God down or disappoint him? That's sort of hello.
Yeah, connect all those things together. Yes.
Yeah.
But first, foremost, it's this care and this attentiveness, I guess.
Is that like, so maybe like reverence, like when you revere something? So it's like this awe, this amazement. There's also like
the most important is actually when you love someone so much that you don't want to hurt him or her, and you're afraid to hurt him or her.
Yeah.
That kind of
yeah, it makes sense.
Yes. I've got that with my dad. I've always had that with my dad.
Okay. I put together a few different things in how I was trying to go about thinking through this. Before I go through like some of the breakdown of the themes and things that I was kind of pondering on, I actually found a video of this scene, obviously from one of the many Christian movies and shows that have been created. I don't know which one it was from, but I found it on YouTube. So I just thought that was kind of cool to see, I guess, the reenactment of the scene and to kind of really visualize and see, I guess, the level of emotion that goes on both sides, both in terms of the widow and the grieving and the community, but also the amazement of watching a reincarnation. So is that okay? Can I play that? It's pretty short. It's only like a minute or so.
It's fine. I'm just gonna, because I've got to go in a car, and so I'll be with you online. Okay.
Okay. Take us for a walk. All right. So hopefully this plays. Oh, is that? There we go.
I don't think there's any sound.
Is there meant to be audio?
No sound.
No.
Is there a sound there?
There should be. Let me see why it would not be playing so I can hear the sound. You guys can't hear sound, huh?
I don't know if you can you do that over Zoom or not.
I'm not sure. Maybe the screen sharing doesn't do sound.
It might not.
I can pull it up on.
I feel like that doesn't work.
I can pull it up on YouTube if you want me to quickly do that, or do you want to skip it?
Let's just watch it. It's all right.
Watch it with no sound?
Yeah.
Okay. So he said, "Weep not," to the widow.
Yeah.
young man I say to thee, arise.
Can you all hear the? Maybe it's me, but
Oh no, we
Oh, the
can't.
sound's not.
We can't hear this sound.
She said a great prophet has risen above it. It's actually really good if you want to go to live stream video. That's on YouTube for anyone who does want to rewatch that with sound.
Church of Christ Latter-day Saints said at the bottom.
Oh, oops, Daisy.
I think I would have been a lot more shocked than the people's faces on that video.
Yeah.
You know, where
Yeah, then
someone
what their
raises
faces
someone from the dead.
Well, it is a reenactment. It is a reenactment.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know. I found it quite meaningful, at least for me, to see that visually as well. I'm a very visual learner, and kind of, I guess, seeing the emotion and really imagining what that would be like. As I said, when Father Branco gave me this topic, and when I looked it up, and it was like the widow of Nain, and I'm like, oh gosh, I don't want to imagine myself as a widow. And then realizing her son died, I was like, oh gosh, I don't want to imagine either of those. Like, they just sound so horrifically painful to go through. So in going through it, I was trying to have a think of what are some of the main kind of themes that I see come through it. So the first one is around miracles and divinity, which I think that was Nick's favourite thing about Jesus. Was it Nick? Who is that some of his favourite stuff?
Probably.
Probably. I think
Yeah.
those was one of his favourites. So that's, again, one of the big things that comes through miracles and divinity. The second is resurrection, which is a really big one. And then we've got love and compassion, which we've had raised a couple of times with parables and things like that. So I do want to talk about that because I thought it was a good opportunity to kind of expand a little bit on what is love and what is compassion. At least from my perspective. Let's do that. So miracles and divinity. So one of the cool things is looking at the divine nature of Christ, the specialty of him, that he is the only one that holds the power to work miracles on the land as a human. Miracles are there to restore the laws of creation as they've been intended before the fall. So that was where there was where there was no sickness or death. So that's what the place of miracles is, to actually restore things how they should be. Miracles were a way to show the unique power of the Son of God. So quite often we see throughout the Bible the questioning of who is he and how can he prove who he is. And he seems to really quietly do this. I found particularly in the video, it's suggested in the Bible too, but how often he will perform a miracle and then just kind of disappear from scenes, like really just kind of walk away, not stand around for all of that glorification and hurrah which goes with it. This miracle actually follows from an earlier passage where he healed a centurion from a farm. So that was where I think the centurion had leprosy or something, and he said, like, let it be healed, and the guy was healed and he didn't die. However, I guess there's always that question with Jesus and people around as to how can he prove that was him. So the raising of the widow's son was an opportunity and a chance to show healing where no coincidence could be considered, where it couldn't be just said, oh, it just so happens that these two things occurred, but there was a very large crowd and the son was very much dead. Up until this point, miracles of resurrection were unheard of and unseen in human history. So there was no, to my knowledge and to what I researched, there was no previous ever existing documentation. No one ever speaking of the concept of resurrection being something that's created on this earth by God or a prophet or Jesus, really. So that's kind of cool in my mind. So this, the second thing that comes through is obviously resurrection. So this is only one of 3 resurrections which are performed by Jesus and that are recorded in the Gospels. So the other 2 are at those different 2 references that I've put there. So this is the first one. Again, a very important moment. It was a confirmation of a promise made by the prophet Ezekiel, how we pronounce that, that God one day will open the grave and raise all of the dead. And that was the reference point. So that was like a prophecy that God will be doing this for the first time that it's seen. Resurrection is something that is beyond the power of any human healer. So there were many human healers who could do many things, but none of them could actually resurrect from the dead. They could heal many illnesses, but once something was gone, that was it. The idea that many have authority over the living. So many people may have all sorts of different authorities, whether they're kings or healers or whatever kind of place they may have in society, but only the Son of God has the power over the living and the dead. And that's a statement from the funeral service. I'm sure Father Uncle is still around listening. He may have a better version of how that's said, but that's something that he said during funeral services. The interesting thing that in this passage is that the resurrection occurs at both the word of Christ and through his physical touch. So both of those things are actually quite important when we start looking at what they mean symbolically within the Bible and the church. It's a demonstration that the divine power of the Holy Spirit flows not from, but through Christ's all pure human nature. So it is the connection of the Holy Trinity that comes through him. Christ's word and body are both life-giving, and this is later proven through his own physical resurrection. The story is a bit of a parallel of his own resurrection in some ways. So as Mary would weep for Jesus at the cross, the tears would turn to joy as her only son is also resurrected. And also on the point of resurrection, so it's considered the church is considered the body of Christ, and so the same power that flows through the church and confers life, healing, and resurrection on all who touch Christ in the church and participate in the spiritual life of the church. I think most of the stories, even when they are not seen as parables, they're stories themselves, they still put through different themes and symbolic meanings in trying to communicate multiple messages. So one of my favourite parts of this is the theme of love and compassion. So when I was looking at the different Gospels, they seem to have like different core themes, like depending on who wrote it. And so the core theme of Luke's Gospels or Luke's stories that he's written, the core theme is the universality of Jesus' love and compassion. So I think this is a particular importance and maybe one of my little favourites currently, and that is seeing this and really understanding this. So in this passage, we're really seeing the joining of Christ's divinity with his unique humanness. So just like many of the other passages where he performs miracles like with the bread and the fish, we talk about compassion. So in the passage here again, it says that when the Lord saw her, he had compassion on her and said to her, "Do not weep." So we need to notice that before he performs any miracle of any kind, that Jesus first has compassion for the widow before taking any action. So it's a really important step that occurs before fixing things or healing things. And it's an important message, I think, for us as humans when we're talking about, being more like Jesus. Like, what does that mean? And this is one of the really big human things that I think that we need to really understand what it means. And I think Father Blanco asked me the question was quite a few weeks ago, like what I think we were talking about, like what is empathy versus compassion. And I was trying to explain that compassion is a much deeper, painful experience as a human. So compassion is to initially recognize the suffering of others and then to take action to help. It embodies a tangible expression of love for those who are suffering. So when we start breaking it down and we look at what is the word compassion, so it comes from the Latin word compati, which means with and suffer. So it means to suffer with. So it's not just about feeling for, it is about feeling, it is suffering with someone, experiencing the suffering that they experience. There's actually that line too far down. Do we have any, Ada, are you Greek? Is
No.
Ada there?
Yes, no.
Oh, you're not. Is anyone Greek? I had a feeling there was someone that was Greek. So the Greek translation for the word compassion, I'm not even going to attempt this. It actually comes from the word intestine. So it's talking about feeling despair on a deep gut-wrenching level. So that's the level of suffering we talk about when we have compassion, that we need to feel that really, really viscerally, feeling someone else's suffering and their pain. So within this story, we have a depiction of the meeting of two different processions. So on the one hand, we have the procession of life, which is represented by Jesus and his disciples and the witnessing crowd. And then we have the procession of death, which is the widow, the son, and the mourners. So a compassion arises when life meets death, so when hope and suffering can come together. Does that make sense in terms of what compassion is?
Yeah, definitely.
Like the depth and the viscerality of it, that it's not just empathy. Yes. Dr.
Yes.
Blanca? Thank you.
Yeah.
So anyway, so as I was saying, this comes before he enacts any kind of miracle. So it's a really big thing. So we have the big question: why the widow? Why her? And I think for me, sometimes when I read, when Jesus performed miracles, in my mind, it's like, why did they choose this person? I think we've had that conversation in the group before. Like, how does he choose people? Why is it not that everyone gets healed?
Yeah.
So I think there's something really, really important about the idea of the widow. So as a widow, she would have been left completely reliant on her child for both love and being looked after. So without her husband and son, she would have been left to suffer destitution and isolation. So it is essentially considered like the worst you could ever potentially suffer as a living being. This is the worst we could do to you. You having your own illness is not as bad as having lost everything, having lost your love and your child. So it's quite a meaningful thing. And when I'll go into like symbolic interpretations around that, so there is symbolism around the idea of a widow, but also what that means for us who've lost faith, people who've lost faith and don't have connection with spirituality. So there's again that two stories being told at the same time. Don't have any questions about the love and compassion?
No.
So as I was saying, so looking at symbolism, so the widow is, I suppose based on some interpretation, I can't guarantee that that's what it is, but on some interpretations, the widow is a representation of the soul without the God. So it is what we are left with when we have no God, we have no faith, we have no spirituality, when we have lost everything, our soul is left destitute, begging, and ready to die. So those around us would be grieving for us too. I think when we talk about, when we have connection with God and connection with spirituality, and we see people who don't have that, who don't have. What was that?
Yeah, no, he's gone.
Yeah, so when we think about that being the idea of a widow and how we mourn the widow, we do also mourn with people who don't have a relationship with God. We mourn for their souls, and I suppose we pray for them too. We have a chat.
Oh no!
Oh wow!
Oh no!
Oh, that's terrible.
Are people at the church still connected?
What
did-
is what is something on the chat is or
Father Branco had to take his daughter to emergency. She's broken a finger.
Mhm.
That's okay. You finish. We're all still here.
Yeah, we're
Okay.
still here. Yeah.
We won't have his guidance. I can't get
Yeah.
this wrong. Ada can guide us though. I think Ada's extremely knowledgeable.
Yes.
So the symbolism of the dead son. So he's brought outside to be buried, and this is a representation of the human mind, which is outside of the church. So there is a bit of this importance in this actually happening outside of the walls of the city, in terms of symbolic meaning. So the dead son actually is a representation of those who are spiritually dead, unable to understand and speak words of reason. It is considered fit only for the funeral of all that is deathly. It is considered fit only for the funeral of all its deathly philosophies and speculations. So again, we've got these multiple representations of what it is to not be with God. And again, I think with the dead son, so with the idea of him not being able to speak, people being dead, is that you have nothing meaningful to contribute in the world. And I think that's what they're talking about, that anything you do have to speak, anything that you do have to share in the world, when you're outside of the church and spiritually dead, the only thing you've got to share is that of, let's say, deathly philosophies and speculations, and nothing of benefit to humankind. There is other wording. So in the New King James one, they talk about coming out on a coffin, but in other older versions, they refer to it as a bier, and that was that, you know how he's on like a stretcher?
Yeah.
That's what this part is referring to, for where the dead body is placed. So the bier is again a representation of the human body. So when it is touched by God, it receives its mind and soul and is brought to life. And it begins to speak with divine words, and now it has something to say, so it's no longer mute, but is resurrected from death. So that was some of the symbolism. I actually keep moving our videos. They keep going. Okay, so I was trying to think, like, what can we bring from this into our lives, or at least what do I feel that I can bring from this passage into my life, or how can I understand it? So understanding that our minds and our souls are resurrected through our faith and knowing of Christ, that even when we may spiritually die at various times in life, so when we may lose our way, become less spiritual, less connected with God, less connected with the church, that Christ is still there to provide resurrection to our souls. So that's not, I think Father Blanc was again talking about, it's not like this finite amount of time, that you were always welcomed back into the world of God. Through his kindness, compassion, and unending love, Jesus chose to change the sadness and suffering to joy after feeling suffering with her. So again, I think this is an important thing to take away in terms of humans, that we always have this choice. We have a choice to suffer with, we have a choice to heal, we have a choice to help people through their pain. To being compassionate, go towards those who suffer the most and suffer with them. God's compassion is total, absolute, unconditional, and without reservation, and that's what we should be aiming for where we can. I think we can often find ourselves walking away from suffering or protecting ourselves from the suffering of others. Walk away with the ideas that we need to have faith in God, that God is there with his love and patience whilst we face our problems. So again, like, the resurrection doesn't happen immediately. That there is suffering, there is mourning going on in this scene, but that it is never too late to give up. It is never too late to imagine that God can be there to help us. So his presence is always there in peace, love, sadness, anguish, suffering, even in death. That his love and compassion is always there. The human body, which is by God, is a mind raised from death, and a soul which lives, and human nature restored and saved. So those are some of my little takeaways. I had a few little thoughts about conversation. I don't know. thoughts about maybe what are some of our own reactions that people have to the death of a friend, or if we do have someone who's suffered death, how do we respond to another person's grief? What do we find ourselves doing? If we want to talk about that. Is there anything that we can learn from the example of the crowd of the town? So I didn't actually talk very much about that, but there's a lot that I guess there's a lot to be learned, to be read and understood about grief, and I have this saying, I don't know whether we use it in psychology a lot more than other places, that grief is for the living. That is for those who are left here, and how do we share that as a community, and what is the role of those around us through that process? And I guess one question I wanted to know from everyone else, like, what is the picture of Jesus that you take from this passage? And my biggest thing is the love and compassion, but maybe other people have other ideas. And then I can challenge people if you want to pick what you want to, what kind of, how we can really extend this into our lives. So, what people in pain do you have in life that you might reach out to this week that perhaps you haven't reached out to, whether it's because you didn't want to feel the suffering, whether it's you haven't had time, or whatever it is. Asking yourself the question, are you willing to suffer with them and do what you can to help without hesitation or expectation, but through unconditional love? And that's another big thing that I think has been repeated multiple times that I've heard in our Bible studies group. How can you allow the nurturing of your own relationship with the Lord, if maybe that's one that you've not been turning to, in terms of sharing your suffering with Him? Do you share your suffering with Him during prayer and things like that? And I think one of the final questions around like call to action for us as people and humans is do you share your suffering with those around you? So sometimes we can be really focused with the suffering of others and helping other people, but we don't often share our own. I don't know, people in this group, whether you tend to be sharers or listeners. But part of compassion is that it's not unilateral, it's not one directional, it's a bi-directional relationship. So part of love and unconditionality of love is also suffering with another by allowing them to suffer with you. That's one way that you can allow others to love you and allow them to, do what we're saying is being to be Christian. So are you willing to suffer with others in your own way as well as suffering for them? So that was some of my questions. I just had that there was just one little prayer before I kind of close this up. And I've had a few different icons in the background, but I couldn't find the place of this one. Oh, here we go. This one was from the Holy Trinity Orthodox Cathedral in the US, and this is a beautiful one. So the little prayer that came with this was, "O Lord, restore us this day from spiritual death around us and within us, as thou hast restored to life, the son of the widow of faith." Amen. That is me.
Very good.
Yeah.
Very good.
It was very good.
Yeah, that was excellent.
Well done.
Yeah, you got
Yeah.
a quiet bunch tonight.
Can you do mine?
Yeah, mine too.
I showed my husband the PowerPoint. He's like, "Did you make it look pretty like this?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm good at making things look pretty."
Yeah, that was great. That was great. I've got a question for you regarding the suffering side. You know when you said, can you be there for someone that suffers? Yes, we can. Can you share your suffering? What if you're just a no share type of person?
That's a big. So, I hear that from a lot of people. I'm generally not a big sharer.
Yeah.
Probably why I'm a psychologist, because I do a lot of listening. So it's interesting because it brings to mind, I had a conversation with a friend who was in a lot of distress a few weeks ago with some personal issues, and I listened to her and talked through things. And it's interesting because she's a psychologist too. And as we were finishing up, she said, "Please make sure you repay me this favour." And I said, what do you mean repay you the favour? And I'm like, I don't know, what favor am I repaying? She goes, please pick up the phone one time and call me in distress.
Okay.
And I was like, how is that doing you a favor though? And she's like, I want to be there for you too. Like, you need to let me love you like you love me.
Yeah.
Right. So that thing is like when we think about what do we gain as humans, and I always say to people, when people are like, oh, I think that sharing is like a selfish thing. I don't want to do it, or I'm a giver. I care a lot for other. I care a lot for other people. It's a selfless thing, and I always go, no, caring for other people is actually quite a selfish thing in some ways because it does make us feel good. So it's not selfish is a bad thing. But we do it.
You know what I feel like when but everyone's different. You know, when there's suffering there, I feel like when it's spoken about or when you're sharing or whatever, but that's just amazing. It just becomes so much bigger because it's vocalized and you're talking about it and people bring it up again. And sometimes it's just easier to go, yeah, okay, I'll deal with that. And let's just deal with it and that's it, done.
I think, from a psychological perspective, my question would be: is that dealing with it, or is that putting that in a box and avoiding it?
Oh no, it's got to be a pretty big. If it's a big problem, it has to be dealt with.
Yeah.
I think maybe where it comes from. I feel like when when you're someone that generally has to deal with it, you've just got to deal with it and get it done.
You don't have a choice.
You don't have a choice, correct? And then once it's done, it's sort of done, tick, bang, it's gone, and let's move on to the next thing. Whereas when you share it, it tends to resurrect itself when to talk about it again and again and again. And sometimes you're like, yeah, all right, new things come up, let's let that go. So sometimes that deters you from sharing it.
Has that been what your experience has been? Like with friends, that if you do tell them about something, that what they'll just keep.
Oh, but you know what? It's in a nice way. It's in a nice way. I'm just being a jerk. It's in a nice way. Hey, that thing, is that okay? Blah, blah, blah. And I feel like in my head, I'm like, oh God, okay, that was like 20 problems ago. Don't worry about it. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's like that. Yeah. So it's not a bad thing. I just find, because you mentioned that, I just find, big shit happens in people's lives, huge stuff, and sometimes you can't avoid sharing because there's other people around and, you might have moments of sharing it, but sometimes sharing it makes it a little bit more difficult to deal with. Or that's just,
Yeah, I suppose it can. It's always hard, like, what exactly are we talking about?
Yeah.
It depends on the thing. And again, I think, a lot of us can be like that, and a lot of us are, resilient. There's a lot that we can deal with without other people, and it's not, I suppose, the idea of, are you willing to share your suffering with others? Again, I think the word suffering really resonates with something. We could come back to like compassion and thinking about that Greek word, that visceral, gut-wrenching pain.
Yeah.
That's different to me calling you and going, oh, hey, but Anka, I just had this like really annoying person at work and they pissed me off.
Yeah, I get it.
Blah, 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 blah. That's like the venting over.
Yeah.
If I have got something that I am deeply suffering with, I can do. Of course, I can do this alone. It's not the question of whether I can. It's the question of what does that provide in terms of unconditional love in my relationship. Where do my relationships end up falling? What role do my friends and family feel that they can have for me if they either are completely unaware of my suffering, or maybe they are aware that I'm suffering but I don't share? And we then create this world of helplessness and estrangement, and everyone wants to kind of protect everyone.
Yeah.
But no one's connecting, no one's feeling that love and support and compassion. That knowing that other people are willing to, the way that I say it's like that there are people in this world willing to sit in that dark, ugly, deep hole with you, and not tell you that you have to get out and smile.
Yeah.
But say, this hole sucks. Let's sit here and do whatever you want. We can laugh, we can cry, we can whatever.
Okay.
So I don't know. Those are my. You don't have, again,
No, great. It's great to hear it. Yeah.
Everyone can do what they want. I think as a culture, I know we've got, like, looking at the names in the group, we've got lots of different not necessarily Orthodox people, like different cultures, but within our culture there's a big thing about, you don't need to share, you don't share your problems.
Oh yeah, that's a huge thing. Yeah.
Nothing to feel. We've had to, like, again, because I always look at things like psychologically and culturally, we've got transgenerational trauma that goes across hundreds and thousands of years in our culture.
Yeah,
we've
I
got
believe
a culture
that.
that's not had a break. We've had a culture that has not had time or space to suffer because it has been about survival.
Yeah.
There's no time to cry over who you've lost or what's hurting when you got bombs being dropped on you, when you're being invaded by different, countries, and you don't have time for that.
Yeah.
And so it's very culturally ingrained in us, whether we were raised there or not. It's the messaging, the inherent messaging we get
grew
put
up
through.
with.
Like,
Yeah.
I was always told, go wash your face enough and chest out and keep going, right?
Yeah. Spoon of concrete and off you go. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's in
I
a lot
get
of
it.
cultures, but it's definitely in ours. And that's, again, like, as if for me, the big theme that I keep walking away with is just keep going, like, keep talking about love, they keep talking about compassion. And this is one thing that I think as a society in general, we really genuinely struggle with. And as a culture, we really genuinely struggle.
Yeah,
and even
I
people
agree
who
with you.
share a lot often do the venting, but they don't do the gut-wrenching, painful suffering.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you on that. Okay.
So, Branko, do me a favour one day and give me a call.
Me?
Yeah, I said do me a favour and give me
deal.
a call one day when you're suffering.
Deal.
Deal?
Yep, deal.
All right.
Yep.
That's to everyone in the group.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Dana.
Thank you.
We're going to start handing our Dana all the week's passages.
I'll just add the psychological and
Yeah, that psychological side. Ota's Branko can just sit in the background and watch now. Yeah,
I don't know if he's,
that was really good.
Listening on his phone, if he's shaking his head, going,
who
like,
knows?
what have they done to Bible study?
Yeah, probably. Poor guy. He's probably freaking out with a kid that's freaking out.
Yeah, poor thing.
Especially if it's one of the younger daughter.
Yeah.
It's only a finger, so hopefully it will all be nice and quick, and they'll all be fine. Anyway, I thank you for the class and the psychology session.
Yeah, that was very good.
I feel like we just got an extra session from her. Thank you.
For free.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Does anyone else have any other thoughts or anything else that strikes them in the passage or anything like that? You're going to bring the passage back up.
Perhaps I just wanted to point out the sort of most transparent Old Testament reference here, which is to in one of the books of Kings, is Elijah raising from the dead, also the son of another widow.
Oh.
And this is, I think Father Branko's told the beginning of this story a couple of times, that Elijah comes, he's sort of exiled politically because he's sort of, effectively effectively he's been critical of the people in charge of Israel at the time, and he's in exile, and God says to him, go to the house of this widow and ask her to give you food and shelter. And the widow complains. She says, well, I haven't got, it's me and my son, and we've got this one little bottle of oil, and we haven't got any food. And he says, no, well, just give me some anyway. And the food somehow never runs out.
Oh, yes.
Part of the
Remember.
story.
Yeah, I remember that story
Yeah,
too.
me too. Me too.
I've told the beginning of that story a couple of times, but at one stage, it says after this, the son of the woman, the mistress of the house, became ill, and his illness was so severe that there was no breath left in him. And she said to Elijah, "What have you against me, O man of God? You have come to me to bring my sin to remembrance and to cause the death of my son." And he said to her, "Give me your son." And he took him from her arms and carried him up into the upper chamber where he lodged and laid him on his own bed. And he cried to the Lord.
Sorry.
Oh.
Keep going, Ada.
And he cried to the Lord, "O Lord my God, have you brought calamity even upon the widow with whom I sojourn by killing her son?" Then he stretched himself upon the child 3 times and cried to the Lord, "O Lord my God, let this child's life come into him again." And the Lord listened to the voice of Elijah, and the life of the child came into him again, and he revived. And Elijah took the child and brought him down from the upper chamber into the house and delivered him to his mother. And Elijah said, "See, your son lives." And the woman said to Elijah, "Now I know that you are a man of God, and the word of the Lord in your mouth is true." So this, this is, I think it's the first instance of anyone being raised from the dead in the Old Testament. And
That's in Kings, is it, Ada?
it's in First Kings, in the Orthodox Study Bible. I think that's Third Kingdoms, it's called. And I suppose one thing you could observe is you could compare the 2 episodes here. And part of it you could compare is that really Elijah, and this is the case with really all the prophets for the most part, the prophets in the Old Testament, when they perform miracles, they don't do so directly. Whenever anyone really does anything that's miraculous in the Old Testament, it tends to be done through prayer. They tend to request something of God, and then the thing happens, rather than it being a sort of a direct action. And that's the case here, that Elijah prays to God, and the child is raised. Whereas in the episode in Luke, Jesus himself is there, and he is sort of the active participant because he is God, and he is the one who raises the son of the widow. Although there is a bit of a subtlety there, and this is frequently the case with the miracles that Jesus performs, is that they're given as instructions to the people on whom those miracles are performed. So here, when he approaches the open coffin and those bearing it stand still, he said, "Young man, I say to you, arise." And the dead man sat up and began to speak, and he gave him to his mother. And so the difference, I suppose, there is that actually it's the young man who is dead who is commanded to rise. And so even though he's dead, he's an active participant. He's the one who does the bringing himself back to life, right? And this kind of participation you see all through the sort of miracles and the healings in the New Testament, that it's through the actions that people perform themselves that they are healed. So I suppose this is suggesting to us that to the extent that to the extent that we want to be healed, that we are called to participate in that. And you also get that in the verses before the episode in Luke, when the centurion says, "For I am also a man set under authority, having soldiers under me. And to this one I say, go, and he goes, and to another, come, and he comes, and to my slave, do this, and he does it." And hearing this, Jesus marveled at him, the centurion, and turning to the crowd following him, said, I tell you, I have not found such faith in Israel. And the centurion who's come and he's worried about his slave who is ill, when they go back, the centurion goes back, he finds a slave in good health. And I suppose the interpretation there, if you like, that these orders are being given to people, and this is the orders are being given to people to heal themselves effectively. And they're given the capacity to do so, but they have to engage with that. They're not being sort of healed passively or against their will or without their own active involvement.
So Ada, do you think that Father Branca keeps talking about our free will and our capacity to choose and to act in our lives? And when I talked about kind of the themes and the symbolic nature of it, and that if it is the dead son is a representation of a soulless body, or a body who's lost their relationship with God, is that even with God turning up in our lives, it's not enough for him to turn up. We need to join that relationship. We need to make that choice toward that.
And even in the case, and I mean, this is sort of a good sort of case for that, because even in this case, you would think the person with the least possible free will is a person who is dead. But even they have sufficient will to obey the instruction. Young man, I say to you, arise. You know, it's not sort of it's even to someone who is sort of, you know, almost like being, if you're dead, you can't really sort of be more passive than that. But even in that case, your participation is still called for.
Does anyone else have any thoughts? We've got a lot of people online who aren't joining in.
No, it's all good for me.
Yeah, I talked enough.
But I could talk about.
Yeah, I talked enough.
Savannah, you're quiet.
Hey,
You're quiet. You've even turned your camera off.
No, I know. I'm sorry. I was just sorry. I was just thinking. I've noticed that these things tend to happen. I don't know if I'm right or wrong. I don't know, but these things tend to happen to people who have received God in their heart. To those who really believe. Do you think that? I don't know. I don't know if I'm making any sense. Like,
there's no reference in this passage to faith or anything like that.
Okay.
Oh no, I was just asking, was that your question? Because that it has a lot of the time. My recollection is too that it's like you have so much faith. There's then this healing, but there's no referencing to faith in this. There's no referencing to the widow's belief in God. There's no referencing, which is interesting, I think, as a thing. I don't know what it means. I don't know what it means.
I don't know.
When they talk about the I was reading a number of different kind of priests who've written about the passage, and a lot of it was kind of more talking about the level of pain and desperation of the widow's position. So I guess I wonder whether the line of faith really lies in the place of the mother. You know, that when you've lost everything,
yeah,
you can believe, you can hold out faith for anything.
Yeah. Yeah. I've just been thinking about that, whether whether you need to receive God or Jesus first, and then you open yourself up to these things happening, whether Jesus chose that young man because because the mother was open to God. I don't know. I'm just asking. I don't know.
Was this making a point about like
Can you put the phone closer to you?
I guess it is making a point like you said, Dana, about Christ's compassion as well. So it's yeah, so he'll even go to those who don't ask or don't come to him, I guess. But then after that, there's that participation. So,
Yeah, maybe this is a passage more about that. Again, I would love it to be more about love and compassion. You know, I think it's interesting because that week I just had this conversation with Branka, which was like, I don't share, right?
Yeah.
But you know, what is the miracle that can happen when compassion is given anyway? If I say to Branka, I will suffer with you even if you don't ask me to. What kind of faith can exist then? What kind of miracle could occur in an environment? What could be received in an environment where faith is not a precondition?
Yeah.
Like the passage around this unconditionality for love and the compassion for that. I will give you without expectation, without you needing to give me anything in return, without you needing to be faithful, without you needing, I will still give. And that's what, like, for me, that I keep going, like, the enormity of having that capacity to love that much, that willingness to offer something so grand with zero condition.
Yeah.
This widow didn't have to prove her faith. She wasn't begging. She wasn't, you know, recently remember what was that recent one with that that lady? She wasn't a Samaritan. What was she? She was something else, and she showed her faith enough. She was following Jesus, and he was like, go away, and then he ended up being like, oh yes, you've proven your faith.
Yeah.
That one was recently, but this is interesting because it's completely different. Like, I will love you even if you have no capacity for love. I will give you everything of me, even if you don't ask for it. And where the faith follows from that, I think, you know, if we said, like, here we go in the case of Branka, maybe it does, maybe she calls me one day. You know, that what follows from that when we are able to give something like that, and no one can give it like Jesus does. Like, no one could give that type of unconditional love, and to use, like, he'd not done resurrection, but he'd not done a resurrection before, and to do that publicly, and that was I don't know, Ada might need to give me context, or anyone else who knows, like, how, that wasn't too far off before he got before he was killed, wasn't it? Like, he was already, there's already been pretty much, like, things were riling up. People were already not happy.
Yeah.
And to do that anyway, and to do it so publicly.
Yeah, he didn't care.
Many of the moments that he didn't do these grand things very publicly, definitely not very often. It was a massive, massive thing, and a resurrection of life in front of so many people in the entire town, and all these disciples, and turns around and walks away. Yeah, I don't know if the passage is so much about needing to have the faith, but needing to have the love.
I think maybe it's about, well, you think about how a person without faith goes to having faith. I guess it's kind of saying that it's Christ's compassion that allows that to happen. That somebody without faith can go to having faith.
Yeah, that can be a pathway to it. Yeah.
But it's yeah, Christ has to have compassion for that to be possible. Something like that.
Oh.
And it's, well, I would say also that the faith is a willingness to, well, to use the example that the centurion uses, is a willingness to follow orders, if you like. So that you have, if you have that kind of trust, you don't need to sort of really have an explanation, explanation of the orders you're given. You don't need to be given a justification of the orders that you're given, but you have a willingness to follow them and participate in them. And so the sign of faith is that when people are offered an outstretched hand, that they accept that and they don't reject that.
Mm. Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Do you think we call it a night?
Oh, yeah. Oh, it's already 9:10.
Okay. All good.
That was all good. Thank you.
Thank you, Dana.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Ferdinand.
Dana.
That was great.
Yeah, that was really good. Thank you, Dana.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye. See you
Good
next
night,
week.
everybody.
Thanks, guys.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.